Welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole, and today we have a very nice change of pace from some of the repertoire that I've been covering recently, going back to a little bit of Rachmaninoff. For the last of his etudes, this is Opus 39, number 9 in D major. This is one of the etudes, of course, that was actually orchestrated by Ottorino Respighi. Well worth taking a listen to that orchestration. So we also happen to have Rachmaninoff's programmatic idea for it, since he shared his ideas for all of the etudes that Respighi orchestrated in order to help Respighi with his work. It's a fairly simple programmatic idea. He just said that it's a big crowd scene in a kind of fair. Beyond that very simple idea, I think that no one would be deceived into thinking that the opening is supposed to represent anything but gigantic bells. So that's fairly obvious, and these bells recur throughout the piece. You'll hear them kind of jumping in at various moments. One of the cleverest things about this etude is the way that Rachmaninoff plays with rhythm. So right there in that opening that we just listened to, he's already toying with the idea of a hemiola. You'll notice that there is this meter change to 3/4, and he has these kind of offbeat patterns going on. So this hemiola idea is going to come back throughout the piece, particularly when we get to the middle section. The whole piece is in just a simple ternary form, so ABA. So when we get to that B section, he really starts to toy around with emphasis and stress and meter. It's very characteristic of Rachmaninoff to do this sort of thing, and you can easily understand why he had such a reputation for liking Beethoven and for being such a great interpreter of Beethoven's works, because it's the sort of thing that Beethoven would do too, having some kind of musical idea encapsulated in the first few bars, which then bleeds out into the rest of the piece and informs everything else that happens. After that hemiola idea, we get the rhythm of the main theme starting by itself. So he really hammers it home that we're going to have this yep-a-bum, yep-a-bum, yep-a-bum rhythm throughout. So ostensibly, the main theme is supposed to be in D major, right? And you certainly do see a lot of D major chords in this main theme. The reason why it has a slightly exotic and non-major feel to it is that he is continually borrowing chords that do not belong in the key of D major. In particular, he seems to be kind of revolving around flat 6 and flat 2, E flat and B flat. As you can see, there's actually several arrivals on either an E flat chord, E flat major chord, or E flat minor chord. So that's what gives this main theme this kind of non-major sound to it, even though it arrives on major triads everywhere, but this kind of exotic flavor to it. It's just borrowing chords not from D major. Those are all chords that would be a little bit more expected in D minor. Even there, it might be a little bit far afield to use as many of them as Rachmaninoff uses here, but it works within this context because the harmonies are so rapidly moving that we don't have time to get too confused by any of them. They're more coloristic. So pretty soon we find that the opening bell effect with the hemiola is going to come back in this passage. It's pretty clear. You can hear it right away. And then we get a new, very martial kind of theme in the left hand, which never really comes back after this. It's kind of a one-off deal. And then there's a very clever variant on the first theme rhythm, which includes these tricky little scales in double thirds. And this idea with some kind of tricky double thirds thing is also going to come back varied in the repeat of the A section. So towards the end of this opening A section, Rachmaninoff starts to already play with the idea of having more hemiola patterns going on. And he does that by actually switching the meter. It's quite odd because he doesn't mark it, but there are 2 bars of 3/4. You can see that they have 3 beats in them instead of 4, even though he hasn't actually marked a meter shift at this point. So it's quite subtle, but you feel already that there's this kind of tension in the rhythm against the underlying meter. And then there's kind of a recapitulation of the introduction figure with the huge bells, this time a step lower. And he still maintains the same hemiola thing going on, but now combining it with the figuration that we had with the main theme. So then we get to the middle section, and this is actually one of my favorite passages in Rachmaninoff's music. It seems very simple, but at the same time, there's this wonderful feeling of wit and charm to it, which I think is very much Rachmaninoff's own. You know, even though Rachmaninoff was known to be kind of, in his public persona, to be kind of dour and serious, I think Igor Stravinsky called him a 6.5-foot scowl. It was well known to people who knew him well that he had actually a very fun-loving character in private. And I think it comes out in his music in passages like this. So he starts to play with this idea of rhythmic shifts and meter changes to the point where we never quite know where the downbeat is or when the next figure is going to start. So I thought the best way to kind of illustrate this would be to have my performance play for you, but with a metronome marking where we feel the beats to be. And you'll notice that the metronome has to sometimes skip or sometimes wait in order to keep on where we feel the beats. Part of the play here is also that he's taking the rhythm from the opening section, the da-da-dum rhythm, which was always with the emphasis on the last note in the opening section. It was always da-da-dum, but now he's shifting it to be da-da-dum with the emphasis on the 16ths. Da-da-dum, ba-ba-bum. And he kind of goes back and forth between the two, and that's part of also what makes the humor of this section. Sometimes it feels like yabba-bum, and sometimes ba-ba-bum. And at the same time, we don't even really know where the downbeats are. So here's my performance of the middle section, and I've got the metronome going and shifting it for when he shifts the emphasis. So I absolutely love that. I just think it's delicious and subtle and just so characteristic of Rachmaninoff. He really was way more ingenious and humorous in his music than people give him credit for. And so you might have noticed that this section ended on an upbeat, which feels like a downbeat, and he begins the reprise of the opening A section also on an upbeat, which is accented to feel like a downbeat. And I say reprise, but he never actually exactly repeats anything. We go back to the same kind of mood and the same figuration and the same style, but he doesn't exactly repeat anything. But we can tell we're back in the same feel as the opening A section. So as I said, he begins with this upbeat, which is accented to sound like a downbeat, and he keeps it going for a long time. So for 5 bars or so, we feel all the upbeats as downbeats all the way through. And he only shifts it right here at this point. He shifts it so that the right hand pattern now is felt on the beat. And you can see there are very clear left hand patterns which are also falling on the beat at this point. So this is just in time for him to bring back that opening idea. Remember at the opening where he had the rhythm of the theme come before the theme started? Well, he recaps that here. And that's really the thing that makes it feel like we're having a repeat of the opening section, even though none of this is actually an exact repeat, is when we hear this. So let's hear that whole passage, though, leading up to that, so you can kind of sense where he shifts the rhythm. And again, I'm going to have the metronome play along with my recording so you can hear exactly where the shift in rhythm happens. So it's really clever. And then we continue on with this march feel, pretty much unchanged for quite some time. It's much more dependable. Harmonically, you'll notice some very interesting things here, that he's going towards distant key areas that were actually suggested in the harmonization of the main theme. You remember how the main theme had those B flat major and E flat major chords, the flat 6 and the flat 2? Well, that's exactly where he goes now. He starts out in B flat major, and from there he moves towards B minor and then G minor, and from there he goes to E flat major, the flat 2. So he has this big arrival on E flat major, and it's kind of like justifying the weird harmonization that he gave for the main theme before. And it's not hard for him here to slide downwards from E flat major back to the home key, to D major. Just when we thought we were nice and steady with the rhythm as well, he adds in more hemiola bars. This time it's even more weird because he gives 2 bars in 3 and then 1 bar in 2 to kind of write everything. So it's weird. He's actually, he could have written this as 2 bars of 4/4. But in order to show the pattern and the way he's kind of overlapping the underlying rhythm, instead he writes it as 2 bars of 3 and then 1 bar of 2. It's kind of a funny notation, but it's good to notice it because it does influence the way you play it a little bit. And then again, one more time, he has these hemiolas at the end when there's this climactic passage with the repeated chords moving higher and higher. And when he finally brings back for the last time this introductory idea of the huge clanging bells, he puts them on the upbeat. So it sounds like, again, the upbeat is a downbeat. So it's very absolutely deliciously clever how he's tying this back around to the middle section and to the transition into the reprise of the A section where everything was sounding like it was on the downbeat that was on the upbeat, actually. There's that, and then even at the very end, he does something a little bit unexpected, I think. I think 99% of composers who had written this piece would have ended it like this. Right? They would have just kept the same rhythm going, the expected rhythm, ba-ba-bum, to end the piece. But instead, he does something a little different. He does this. It's really nice. It's really refreshing somehow that he does something which is just slightly unexpected at the end like that. And it just makes us kind of sit up and take notice. So I really love that. This whole piece, is maybe it doesn't seem typical for Rachmaninoff because Rachmaninoff is so associated with romantic themes and beautiful long lines and so forth. His second concerto or his third concerto are both great examples of that. But actually, he was kind of influenced by the younger generation, the modern generation, with their more percussive, hard-hitting effects and their more streamlined textures and forms. He wrote this set of etudes before he left Russia during the Revolution, and I think that it really puts paid to the notion that it was the trauma of the separation from his homeland that caused his style to undergo such an enormous shift in his later works that are much more mercurial, that are much more concentrated, shorter, much more fragmentary, things like the Fourth Concerto, the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, the Third Symphony, the Corelli Variations, and so forth. I think you can see in these etudes, though, that he was already going in that direction while he was still in Russia. He was experimenting with these kinds of more percussive effects, different types of piano writing. He was experimenting with making his forms more highly varied and leaner and clearer. So I personally think that the direction he was already paving the way for with this set of etudes and with the revision of his first concerto, I think he would have gone that way whether or not he had to leave Russia. So stay tuned. I have the complete performance coming up with my notes and the score. Please do consider supporting the channel, either at patreon.com/independent pianist, or you can also support me financially using other methods in the description box, and any amount is very helpful for me. I always appreciate that because it helps me to feel motivated to continue with this channel. Also, I love it if you like and subscribe and leave comments, because I really like to hear what your opinions are, whether they're positive comments or negative comments. I can learn from everything. So that's about it. Stay tuned next week. I'll have some more great music, great conversation, and until then, keep practicing.